for a very long time because I am traveling at this time, but I'm very delighted to be with you. I would like to have the privilege of introducing our facilitator, Mr. Ndego Hakim. Mr. Ndego is a seasoned geographer. He currently teaches at Mengo Senior School, but has had experiences teaching in a number of schools within Kampala and around Uganda. He's sharing with us his experiences, his knowledge, and his wisdom in physical geography. Mr. Ndego, these are students from around Uganda who have chosen to study geography and be better. I would like to introduce you to them and welcome you to this platform. Ladies and gentlemen, every Monday we have paper 3, every Wednesday we have paper 2, and Friday we do have paper 1. We are delighted to have you. Please enjoy yourselves. Mr. Namdala, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Golova. I think now we can start. Mr. Ndego, you can start. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Namdala. Thank you, Mr. Karima. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is teacher Ndego Hakim from Mengo Senior School. First of all, I want to thank Mr. Karima for introducing me to this program. Mr. Karima is a long-time colleague, the one who took me to Mengo Senior School in the late 1990s. Before I went to Makele College School, where I taught for 14 years, then went back to Mengo Senior School. So with Mr. Karima for quite some time, and we have shared a lot. So I thank you for initiating this program, creative, helping our learners, and I believe at the end of the talk, we have benefited. Thank you for organizing this. And at least today we want to share some information with the learners on this platform. Basically, we are going to look at some questions. How to go about with questions. Whether mass wasting, tourism, information, glaciation, there are many topics, but today we decided to begin with weathering, because weathering seems to be a very common topic, and it is a little bit of a challenge to many learners. I believe most of you from Senior 6 have this topic. Thank you, Mr. Mandara. This is Senior 6 class. Those people going to Senior 6. We are not promoted, but we believe when the schools begin, they will be Senior 6. So, I was saying that most of the learners on the platform who are going to Senior 6 have already done this topic. Now, what is important is to review, to remind you, because some people have forgotten and don't know how to interpret some of the questions. Stop it. Whether you don't know what it means. Whether it's breaking and decomposition of rocks. It's a general definition. The breakdown and decomposition of rocks near or at the surface in situ. In situ means remaining in the same place. So when a rock breaks down and it decomposes, it has weathered. And I always tell learners that the topic weather comes from the word weather. Weather has two major elements, rainfall and temperature. So when we say weather, it means the rock breaks down as a result of the two major elements of weather, rainfall, temperature. Temperature is responsible for the breakdown of the rock. rainfall, that is water, is responsible for the decomposition of the rock. So we combine it and say, let us call it weathering, which means breakdown and decomposition of the rock near or at the surface of the sea. And then, to name, we know physical weathering, chemical weathering. Physical weathering, the rock breaks down but does not change its chemical nature. While chemical weathering, the rock decomposes and there is a change in chemical nature. And I will use an example that suppose this is a rock, this piece of chalk. When it's like this, so 1, 1, 1. See the chemical composition when I write this piece of chalk. When I break it down into pieces, this, and I write here, there is no change. It means if this piece of chalk was a rock, it has broken down, but it has not changed its chemical nature. That is physical weathering. What brings about the breakdown of the rock? That heat. An element of weather. And at the same time, if I get this piece of chalk, and do like this, then oh, I was saying that if that's something I have not had, that suppose this is a rock. You see this piece of chalk, you see its chemical composition, and I do like this. You see it's like 1, 1, 1. Okay. When I get this same piece of chalk and I break it into pieces like this, I write on the bit. It has not changed. It means this piece of chalk has broken down, but it has not changed its chemical nature. So that is physical weathering. It means breakdown of the rock without change in the nature of the rock. But if I brought water and I poured water here, when you pour water here, automatically, when you write on the blackboard, it will have changed. It will not look like the original. It means when you add water, the chemical nature changes. It means when you add water to the rock, its chemical nature changes. And that is chemical weathering. Therefore, weathering is the breakdown of the breaking and decomposition of rocks near or at the Earth's surface. We all know that. We all know that there are two types: physical weathering and chemical weathering. So physical weathering involves breakdown of the rock, but it does not involve change in the nature of the rock. Chemical weathering involves decomposition of the rock, and it involves change in the nature of the rock. Means there are two types of weathering: physical and chemical. Having learned that, from there we say, now I'm giving you a background before we look at this question, because you need to understand the content before you look at this question. Then you say, now, if physical weathering needs heat, where is it dominant? In semi-arid areas. What about chemical weathering? If it needs water, where is it dominant? It's dominant in tropical humid areas. I will later explain what this means. So, physical weathering is dominant in the semi-arid areas of East Africa. What are these semi-arid areas? They include Turkana, area like Turkana, we have northeastern Kenya, we have areas of Masaka corridor, and others. Now, if physical weathering is dominant in semi-arid areas, does it mean that chemical weathering does not take place? No. Chemical weathering takes place in semi-arid areas, but on a small scale, not like physical weathering processes. So, physical weathering dominates. It's the most dominant type of weathering in semi-arid areas, but chemical weathering also takes place on a small scale. Then we are saying, what about chemical weathering? Chemical weathering, which is the decomposition of rocks, is dominant in tropical humid areas of East Africa. And what are the tropical humid areas of East Africa? These are areas that receive heavy amount of rainfall, hot temperatures, dense cloud cover, like the shores of Lake Victoria. That's where chemical weathering dominates. But does it mean that physical weathering does not take place in tropical humid areas? No, it does, but on a small scale. Why? Because of certain reasons. Dense cloud cover and vegetation. It takes place at a small scale. So having known that definition of weathering and the types, we need to know now physical weathering processes and chemical weathering processes. Now, the physical weathering processes, weathering takes very many forms. That is physical weathering, very many forms. For example, block disintegration, that is one process. Granular disintegration, there's what we call pressure release or offloading, frost shattering, aridity shrinkage, salt crystallization, dilatation. These are physical weathering processes. Block disintegration, granular disintegration, pressure release or offloading, frost shattering, aridity shrinkage, salt crystallization. Then there is exfoliation. These are some of the physical weathering processes. So to answer this question, you need to grasp or to have grasped these physical weathering processes first. How? What is block disintegration? Block disintegration means breakdown of homogeneous rocks into rectangular blocks as a result of heating and cooling during day and night, respectively. So we can say local disintegration is the breakdown of homogeneous rocks into rectangular blocks due to heating and cooling during day and night, respectively. During day and night, respectively. That is local disintegration. Homogeneous rocks that have the same minerals break down into rectangular blocks due to heating during day and cooling during the night. That's what the statement means. Due to heating and cooling during day and night, respectively, it means the homogeneous rocks break down into rectangular blocks as a result of heating by the sun during the day and cooling during the night. So heating during the day results into expansion of the rock. Then cooling at night results into contraction of the rock. Now, this repeated heating and cooling that brings about expansion and contraction eventually results into breakdown of rocks into bigger rectangular blocks, and that one is called local disintegration. But when we get approaching this question, we need to briefly describe the physical weathering processes in the So we have now known it is a homogeneous rock that is breaking down as a result of repeated heating and cooling. Then what about granular disintegration? Granular disintegration refers to, I think I can grab this, then briefly highlight granular disintegration. Granular disintegration is the breakdown of heterogeneous rocks. Heterogeneous rocks into small particles known as granules due to heating during the day and cooling during the night when temperature reduces. Now, the difference between local disintegration and granular. Granular refers to breakdown of heterogeneous rocks. Heterogeneous rocks have different meanings. So this means absorb heat at a different rates. So it means breakdown of heterogeneous rocks into small particles known as granules due to heating during the day that results into expansion, and cooling at night that results into contraction. So when the process continues for a long period of time, the rock breaks down to tiny particles. That is granular disintegration. Then pressure release or offloading. It refers, this is a physical weathering process where the rock is subjected to pressure or too much load, which results into contraction of the rock. And when the load is removed, or when the pressure is released, there is expansion. So loading and offloading results into expansion and contraction of the rock until it develops cracks and eventually breaks down. We say that is pressure release or offloading. I'm saying it's a physical weathering process which involves weight being exerted on the rock or load exerted on the rock leading to contraction. Then when the load is removed, the rock expands. So repeated loading and offloading results into contraction and expansion of the rock, which eventually leads to breakdown of the rock physically. Then frost shattering. Frost shattering takes place in mountainous areas that experience glaciation, especially top of mountains like Kenya, Kilimanjaro, and Rwenzori, because those are the glaciated mountains in East Africa. So what happens during that day when the temperatures increase slightly in mountainous areas, water melts and penetrates the cracks of the rock. Water has penetrated cracks. Okay. Now, when temperatures go below freezing point, the water in the crack freezes And now when it freezes, it expands, exerts pressure, and shatters the rock physically. You see that process is frosty shattering. So what's frost shattering? It means breakdown or shattering, as shattering of the rock as a result of freezing and thawing of water within the rock cracks. The rock cracks, especially in glaciated areas of East Africa, like those mountains I mentioned. So that repeated freezing and thawing of water results into shattering.
Mr. Ndego, I have just a little communication. If at all you have any question, it's better you say, excuse me, sir, then you ask. Mr. Ndego will help you instead of putting it in the chat room. Am I clear? If at all you have any question, you just say, excuse me, sir, then he will attend to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any question before we proceed? Because we are first briefly looking at the physical weathering processes, reminding you, because I understand you did this in your schools, but we are trying to remind ourselves before. Because in answering this question, these processes will be vital because they must be integrated. Okay? So I said frost shattering, breakdown or shattering of the rock as a result of freezing and thawing of water within the cracks, the rock cracks, especially in mountainous areas in stuff that are glaciated. That is frost shattering. Then aridity shrinkage is a physical weathering process which involves water penetrating rocks, clay. Okay, so when during the short rainy season in semi-arid areas, water penetrates the clay and the clay swells. When the clay swells, after some time, the dry season sets in, the long dry season, and that water that had penetrated the clay will begin evaporating. And when water evaporates, then the clay begins to shrink. And when it shrinks, then the cracks begin developing within that rock, and that clay will eventually break. We say that is aridity shrinkage. The water penetrates the clay during the short rainy season. That clay swims, but during the dry season, water evaporates as the clay begins to shrink and develops cracks, resulting into physical weathering. Salt crystallization is common in areas that have sodium chloride, like areas of Katwe. So what happens in this process? We have a rock. Let's assume this is a rock, which rock has cracks and cavities. So water dissolves the salts, and the salt solution penetrates the rock cavities. That is, during the short rainy season in semi-arid areas, water dissolves the salts, and that salt solution penetrates the rock cavities and cracks. Now, when the dry season sets in, this is always a long dry season, there is excessive evaporation of water. Water now begins to evaporate as the salt crystals remain in the cavities and begin accumulating. So when the process continues for a long period of time, the continued accumulation of salt crystals within the rock cavities result into pressure, and the rock will be shattered physically because of the accumulation of salt crystals, which salt crystals accumulate when the water is evaporated, because the salt crystals cannot evaporate. It is water that evaporates, then the salts accumulate within the rock cavities, resulting into shattering, like in cathode area. Then lastly, exfoliation process. This one takes place in semi-arid areas which experience hot temperatures during the day and cool temperatures at night. In semi-arid areas during the day, temperatures are too hot, resulting into expansion of the rock. Suppose this is a rock, okay, subjected to heat during the day. That heat will concentrate on the surface, and the surface will expand. Then at night, when temperatures reduce, there is contraction. So this process takes time. Heating during the day leading to expansion of the surface. At night, contraction, expansion, contraction, expansion, contraction. And eventually, the surface will build structures and it will eventually peel off. And when it peels off, it exposes what we call a smooth surface, which we call exfoliation dome. So that process is called semi-arid areas. It is the surface which is affected by heat, and heat is concentrating on the surface, resulting in expansion, contraction, until the surface peels off. We say that is exfoliation, or onion exfoliation. Now, that is physical weathering areas and processes. Now we are in position 2. I have just reminded you what we studied. Now we are looking at this question. Account for the dominance of physical weathering in the same arid areas of East Africa. So the approach, let us just write the approach is. The approach first define physical weathering. Define physical weathering. That is one. Define physical weathering. Then, after defining physical weathering, identify semi-arid areas where it is common. Yeah, it is common. Then describe characteristics of semi-arid areas of East Africa. Describe characteristics of these semi-arid areas. After that, briefly identify the physical weathering processes. The physical weathering processes. And lastly, give reasons for dominance of physical weathering in semi-arid areas. That is the approach to that question. You define physical weathering. We do not want to waste a lot of time defining weathering, types of weathering, because the question is telling us physical weathering. Define physical weathering. 2, identify semi-arid areas where physical weathering is dominant. Then describe characteristics of semi-arid areas. Then describe characteristics of semi-arid areas. Then briefly identify and describe the physical weathering processes. And then give reasons for the occurrence of or the dominance of physical weathering in semi-arid areas. Then physical weathering is first one. You say physical weathering is the breakdown of rocks as a result of heating and cooling as physical weathering is the breakdown of rocks as a result of heating during the day and cooling during the night. So we can say breakdown of the rock as a result of heating and cooling during day and night. Okay. Then we say it does not involve change in the nature open composition of the rock, the nature of rock definition. Don't say physical weathering is the breakdown and the composition. No, that's the definition. And we say breakdown of rocks as a result of heating and cooling during that night respectively. In physical weathering, there is no change in the chemical composition of the rock. That is definition. Then after that, definition have done it. Then identify the semi-arid areas where it is common. Then you say physical weathering is common in semi-arid areas like Ghana, Northeastern Uganda, Karamoja region, and Present corridor, and Masaka corridor. These are areas where it is.
Mr. Ndego, we have someone who has put up her hand. I'm seeing Amira and Michelle. Can you ask your question, Amira?
Well, with the teacher, can you please help me repeat the definition of physical weathering? We didn't get some words clear. Thank you. That's all.
Physical weathering, let me write it here. Okay. Physical weathering refers the breakdown of rocks as a result of heating during the day and cooling that during at night that lead to expansion and contraction of the rock. Then you say in physical weathering, comma, there is no change, there is no change in the chemical nature of the rock. There is no change in the chemical nature of the rock. It means the definition, physical weathering. This is physical weathering. First, breakdown of the rock. Why does the rock break down? As a result of heating during the day and cooling during the night. What does heating during the day and cooling during the night result into? Which lead expansion and contraction. Heating during the day results into expansion. Then cooling at night results into contraction. So when that process continues for very many years, the rock now breaks down physically, but its chemical nature does not change. That is physical weathering. That's why you say in physical weathering, there is no change in the chemical nature of the rock. That is definition of weathering. Because remember, up we can say, define physical weathering, identify semi-arid areas where it is dominant, and their characteristics. And I've said that areas, semi-arid areas in East Africa, where physical weathering is dominant, include areas of northern Kenya, Canada region. Then there is what we call areas of northeastern Uganda, Karamoja. Other places include parts of central and southern Tanzania. Then you have parts in Uganda here, and then some parts Lake Albert Flats. All these are semi-arid areas. Lake Albert Flats, corridor. These are the same areas. Canada region, Karamoja, northeastern Uganda, parts of central and southern Tanzania. All these are semi-arid areas of East Africa. Now from that, we are going to look at characteristics of these semi-arid areas. Physical weathering breakdown. I've not included the word decomposition, because it is physical weathering that I'm defining, not chemical. So breakdown of the rock as a result of heating and cooling that results in expansion and contraction of the rock. And in physical weathering, there is no change in the nature of the rock. Then after that, I have mentioned that the same arid area that some of them are these, Lake Albert Flats, and Canada region, that is northern Kenya, northwestern Kenya, northeastern Uganda, including Karamoja, then some parts of central Tanzania and southern Tanzania. Those are semi-arid areas. What are their characteristics? So characteristics, say, these areas are characterized. So characteristics are these ones that I'm going to note down. These areas experience low amount of rainfall of less than 750 millimeters per annum. It means when you combine the amount of rainfall received in each month in semi-arid areas, it does not exceed that 750 millimeters. Yet in Equatorial, it exceeds 1,500. So that is one characteristic. The moment you go to
Mr. Ndego, we have Judith. She has put up her hand. Judith, can you ask your question?
Judith. Yes.
Judith, unmute yourself and ask.
I'm asking if I'm writing the background, like you've given us the definition, Like, do I show that teacher that now these are characteristics, or I just continue?
I don't say these are characteristics. Let me give an example. After training, you say physical weathering is the breakdown of the rock as a result of heating during the day and cooling at night that leads to expansion and contraction of the rock. In physical weathering, there is no change in the nature of the rock. Physical. Then you can give another problem. Physical weathering is dominant in semi-arid areas. For example, you mentioned this, Albert flats and so forth. Okay. Then you can add a problem. These areas are characterized by, see that?
Oh,
Characterized by low amount of rainfall of less than 750 millimeters. You see that?
yes.
Yeah. Then let me write other characteristics. Don't write characteristics and underline the company. No. Yes.
Okay.
These areas are characterized by low amount of rainfall of less than 750 millimeters. Another characteristic, hot temperatures of above, sometimes above 100 degrees Celsius. That's another characteristic. Then it is also characterized by a big diurnal range of temperatures of about 10 degrees Celsius. What do I mean here? These areas are characterized by low amount of rainfall that as you see. Then the temperatures are hot. They can exceed 30 degrees Celsius. Then you say the big daily range. The daily range is big. For example, during the day temperatures can be 32, then at night it can drop to 22. So the difference between the highest and lowest is big. That is big daily range. It is extremely hot during the day. And at night, the opposite. So that is big daily range temperature. Semi-arid characteristic. Then characterized by low humidity of it can be less than 50%. You see, in Equatorial, humidity is high, can go up to 80%. Humidity is the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere. If an area receives heavy rainfall, definitely there must be high humidity because the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere is high. But if the area receives less rainfall, it means the amount of water vapor in the atmosphere is less, and that is the humidity. So these areas are characterized by low humidity, which is not above that. It's also characterized by limited cloudy cover. Characterized by limited cloudy cover. That makes the region extremely hot during the day and cold at night. These areas are also characterized by limited vegetation. So now, those are characteristics of semi-arid areas. Remember, in our approach, if you still remember, we say definition of physical weathering. Semi-arid areas, characteristics of semi-arid areas, then the processes, then the factors. So we have defined physical weathering, which we have done. We have identified the semi-arid areas, which are what? They can back flats, and we have said these areas are characterized by, we have described the characteristics. Then after that, we say the physical weathering processes in these semi-arid areas include Now, I first of all gave you all the physical weathering processes when I was describing. But now, when we are looking at the physical weathering processes in semi-arid areas, we are not going to include all because frost shattering the same takes place in Venezuela, Kenya, and Kilimanjaro, and those are not semi-arid areas. So we shall highlight that the physical weathering processes in those areas include local disintegration, granular disintegration, exfoliation, salt crystallization, aridity linkage. You see those processes, but we may leave out frost shattering because that one takes place in cold areas. But if the question was describe, if the question was account for the dominance of physical weathering in East Africa without linking just semi-arid, then we include frost shattering because it meant East Africa, they do not specify. But since this one is saying in semi-arid areas, when we come our processes, we exclude frost shattering. So after this learning characteristics, as I say, we begin another problem. If these processes should be written in short paragraphs, each process. For example, in local disintegration, which I wrote on the PV, you say this is the breakdown of homogeneous rocks as a result of heating during the day and cooling during the night, which leads to expansion and contraction. That is paragraph first. Then another short paragraph. Granular disintegration is the breakdown of heterogeneous rocks into small particles known as granules due to heating and cooling and during that night respectively. Then another paragraph. Exfoliation, the physical weathering process which involves the heat striking the surface of the rock that lead to peeling off of the surface due to expansion and contraction during that night. Then another short paragraph. Aridity linkage, the process whereby clay absorbs water and swells. Then during the dry season, the water evaporates and then the clay shrinks, resulting into development of rocks. Then salt crystallization, the process where solution of salt penetrates rock cavities. Then when there is evaporation, the salt crystals accumulate in the rock cavities, shatter the rock physically, like in areas of parts of assessment. In short paragraphs, those physical weathering processes. After which we now go to why it is dominant in semi-arid areas, the factors that account for the dominance of physical weathering in semi-arid areas. What are these factors? Why is physical weathering dominant in semi-arid areas? So the factors are going to look at. And hopefully, when we are writing the factor, we are going to integrate the processes as I'm going to show you. Is there any question before we go to factors? I'm pausing a bit before we go to factors that account for the dominance of physical weathering in semi-arid areas. So I'm pausing a bit, some few seconds in case you have any question.
Mr. Ndego, we have someone who has put up, I don't know, Rena.
Okay.
Rena, can you ask?
Okay, mine is about, I'm making an inquiry when you're talking about the processes of physical weathering. Do you necessarily have to write them in a chronological kind of order?
No, not chronological order. You just write them in short paragraphs, 2 to 3 lines, briefly, to prove that you know what that process means. Not like exactly I've written them like that. No, But as said, as you are writing these other processes in semi-arid areas, eliminate frost shattering, because frost shattering takes place in mountainous areas that are glaciated, like Kenya, Missouri, and Kilimanjaro. Only those three. Oregon does not have glaciers. So, as we are explaining processes, we may not put there, this one must be the first, this is the second. No. In the beginning, exploration, not sort pixelization, not local disintegration. Yeah.
Charity? Charity,
Yes.
you ask.
Your question answered. Another one.
My question, is it necessary?
Yes. I'm not getting you clear. Yes, please. Hello? I've lost you. Please ask. Can't get you. Hello? Hello? Oh. Is the network disturbing? Hello? Okay. Maybe we can proceed because now, hello? Someone asking.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Me, I'm asking.
Yes.
When explaining the processes, we also need to put examples where they are happening in South Africa, or the examples we put above is enough.
Yes. Yeah, in the physical examples are very crucial. Necessary, try as much put examples, but make very sure of the place and an example. Example. Okay. Examples are very crucial. Some people put wrong examples. You can generalize that. For example, you say frost shattering takes place in areas around it. That one is not good. Or when you say frost shattering takes place in mountainous areas like Oregon, that is not true. So, quote an example, very sure. For example, exfoliation. Exfoliation, you can give an example in Japan, in Northeastern India, in Sorot, in Kumu. That one is good. So that is it. But what is important is to highlight the processes to prove that you know them. Because as we are going to answer this, we are going to interpret. Okay? So the dominance of physical weathering is the Africa, I think above. One factor is climate. Okay? And for climate, we shall look at hot temperatures, low temperatures, and then limited rainfall. So, and say in semi-arid areas, the hot temperatures, very hot temperatures during the day, lead to expansion of the rock, and low temperatures at night lead to contraction. So repeated expansion and contraction of the rock resulting to physical weathering processes like, then you can measure hot temperatures, okay, hot temperatures lead to expansion during the day and contraction at night. Resulting into breakdown of rocks through processes like, then you can mention any two processes like block disintegration, granular disintegration. You see how I have explained that point. I've not said hot temperatures lead to expansion and contraction, and this has led to physical weathering in semi-arid areas. I've avoided the word physical weathering, at least at the end of my statement. I'm saying hot temperatures lead to expansion and contraction being done that result in breakdown of rocks through processes like block disintegration, granular disintegration. That is the hot temperature. Then we can also say very low. Sorry, we shall not put this very low temperatures. We put very low temperatures. We put hot temperature during the low temperature at night that lead to expansion, contraction, and breakdown of the rock through physical means of block disintegration. But we shall not put very low temperatures, because if the question was about phenomena of physical weathering in East Africa, we would say that extreme low temperatures in mountainous areas resulting into freezing and thawing and may lead to physical weathering process like frost shattering. But remember, frost shattering does not take place in semi-arid areas. The question is really that this. Therefore, we shall leave out very low temperatures in mountainous areas because we usually Kilimanjaro, not a mountain. Then limited rainfall in semi-arid areas lead to limited vegetation cover, and this has exposed the parent rock to heating and cooling, resulting in physical weathering processes like exfoliation, granular disintegration. Then there is another one, nature of parent rock. Parent rock. And parent rock, you can look at homogeneous rocks. You can look at heterogeneous. You can look at soft rocks. Look at jointed rocks. Yeah. You can see the nature of the dominance of physical weathering because of the nature of the parent rock. Homogeneous rocks in semi-arid areas are heated uniformly. You say homogeneous rocks in semi-arid areas are heated uniformly without into expansion and contraction and eventual breakdown of the rock through what process? Rock disintegration, exfoliation. That is it. Then heterogeneous rocks, these ones have different minerals, are not heated uniformly. So different minerals absorb heat at different rates. and this has resulted into breakdown of the rock through processes, right? Granular disintegration. Soft rocks can easily break down. Soft rocks can easily break down through processes, right? Pressure release, local disintegration, granular. Pressure release, that is soft rocks, granular, so very jointed rocks, rocks which have joints, these rocks which have joints can easily break down physically through processes like local disintegration. Why? Because when the heat strikes, it affects the joints so much. And this may result in eventual breakdown of the rock through processes like local disintegration. You see how I am integrating processes as mentioned factor. I identify how that factor about physical weathering process and what process. I'm saying the factor of taking that off when I'm looking for homogeneous rocks that are heated uniformly. Okay. Now through that process of local disintegration and that have different minerals do not absorb heat at the same rate. So you break it down through the process of granular disintegration. Then you get into rocks. Okay, can easily be broken down because when the heat concentrates on the grades, it's expansion, contraction, and expansion, contraction eventually results in cracking, more cracking and breakdown of the rock through local disintegration. That is little current. Any question? Anyone online? Anyone trying to ask? Okay.
Teacher. Teacher,
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
Does physical weathering only occur in semi-arid areas?
No. When I was beginning, I said physical weathering dominates in semi-arid areas because of the conditions there. But chemical weathering also takes place in semi-arid areas, but on a small scale because of limited water. So all weathering processes take place in all regions of the world, but it depends on the conditions. Chemical weathering dominates in equatorial areas, but physical weathering also takes place in equatorial areas, but on a small scale because of certain reasons. Then the question we're asking, physical weathering dominates just, for someone say, this one is dominant. There are more girls in this class than boys, but it doesn't mean that there are no boys. Or there are more boys in this class than girls. Doesn't mean that, but there are few. So physical weathering takes place, is dominant in same area, but chemical weathering processes also take place, but on a small scale because of limited water.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Can we proceed?
Excuse me, teacher.
Yes.
Teacher, my question is, as you are explaining, like that point, the parent lock, then do you explain all that, the one which I've listed down, like the homogeneous locks, heterogeneous locks, and jointed locks? Do you explain all, or you can choose one?
It depends, but if you exhaust that, you explain that, you are showing a kind of knowledge and maturity. Okay? You don't need to explain it too much. It's just an implement of natural character. And I like homogeneous rocks are heated uniformly, resulting in expansion and contraction, and break down through the process of expansion and contraction. While homogeneous rocks, okay,
Okay.
So remember this integration. Yes. No.
Hello? There may be network.
Is that clear?
Yes, it is clear. I've got you, teacher.
Okay. So those are two factors. Those are 2 points. Okay. Temperature rainfall, then nature of parent role. Okay. Then the third factor is relief. And we say, when we say third factor is relief, and say in semi-arid areas, the low relief. Okay. Low relief. Semi-arid areas, the low relief allow sorry, I was saying relief, okay, not in low-lying areas. Relief in semi-arid areas, the steep slopes, okay, not low relief, the steep slope accelerate the speed of running water, and this results in exposure of the parent rock to heat. Semi-arid areas, the steep slopes accelerate the speed of running water, and this in the end exposes the parent rock heat, which leads to expansion and contraction and eventual breakdown of the rock through processes like rock disintegration, like pressure release. So for relief, we are looking at steep relief as exposed as leading to erosion and exposure of parent rock to agents of weathering like heat, which results into expansion, contraction, and breakdown of the rock through weathering processes like rock disintegration, exfoliation, and so on. That is relief. Then another point is limited. We say that vegetation is crucial. That's why in equatorial areas, because of the dense vegetation, protection of the parent rock against excessive heat. But in semi-arid areas, Canada, there is limited cover. So there is no protection of the parent rock from the agents of weathering the heat. So the heat directly strikes the rock and it's expansion. Then at night, since there is limited cloud cover, there is contraction. Temperature has dropped considerably, there is contraction. So repeated expansion, contraction, resulting in breakdown of the rock through processes like exfoliation, like rock disintegration, like granular disintegration. That is it, limited vegetation cover. Then there's another factor, man. Man accounts for dominance of physical weathering in semi-arid areas. This is through mining, farming, road construction. All these activities of man, physical weathering. When the man carries out mining, the first process he does is clear vegetation and expose the parent rock to heat. And when he clears vegetation, he then takes another step further and begins mining using explosives. So in that process, the explosives break the rock physically. In some parts of Kasese, it's mining and quality. Then road construction. When man wants to construct roads, the first thing he does is clear the vegetation where the road is going to pass. And when he's constructing the road, again he uses machines. These machines cause vibration within the earth, and the rocks begin breaking. And when the rocks break down, that is physical weather. Blasting, all that can break down the rock physically, and that is man. That is the work of man. Then movement of animals or trampling of animals. Trampling of animals. Again, these animals break down the rock physically, or break down the rock through physical means. Even rodents, okay, they dig tunnels underground, and in the process, they break down rock physically or through physical means, that is in semi-arid areas. So all these factors are contributing to break down the rock physically in semi-arid areas. And then you can also take plant roots. Plant roots. When plant roots grow, they grow in local joints and cracks and enlarge them, and hence break down of the rock. When plant roots grow in rock cracks and joints, they enlarge them, and eventually it results into breakdown of the rock physically, that plant roots. Then there is always a factor, time. We say weathering is a long process. Weathering does not take a short period of time. You cannot expect the rock to break down in 2 years or 3 years. Okay. So weathering as a process takes time. So the dominance of physical weather in the same areas is because of the amount of time taken. Physical weathering takes time. It can take millions of years for the rock, thousands of millions of years for the rock to break down completely. So in all, the dominance of physical weather in the semi-arid areas is a result of climate, temperatures, relief, steep slopes, winter vegetation, man, moss, plants. Here I have not looked at low relief because low relief promotes chemical damage. But because low relief makes water stagnate and it can penetrate deep into the rock, leading to chemical damage. But here it is physical weather. So that is it. Now, can we twist the question as we summarize and remember? This question is saying account for the dominance of physical weather in the semi-arid areas. The positive is to what extent does nature of parent rock account for dominance of physical weathering, for dominance of physical weathering in the semi-arid areas of East Africa. I'm now giving you questions. Okay. Let me write it here. Questions 4. They are saying, to what extent does nature of parent rock? To what extent does nature of parent rock account for the dominance of physical weathering or the dominance of physical weathering in the same arid areas of East Africa. In the same arid areas of East Africa. That's one. Two, if it account for the dominance of chemical weathering, account for the dominance of chemical weathering in the tropical humid areas of East Africa. So these are fun questions. Now, having discussed that first one, now you can have a hint on these two. This question, the second one, account for the dominance of chemical weathering in the tropical humid areas of East Africa. I discussed this today on Delta TV. Those who watched that show was from 9, 11. I discussed it. Then I discussed this sometime back on Delta TV. But if it is to what extent that nature of parent rock account for the dominance of physical weathering in same arid areas, now I think you can take the approach. The approach again is if account for dominance of physical weathering, the teacher has to define physical weathering, identify areas which are semi-arid, then the characteristics of semi-arid areas, then the processes, then the factors. What about this one? To someone who has been following, you would automatically know that if they say to what extent does nature of parent rock account for the dominance of physical weathering in semi-arid areas, to begin again by defining physical weathering areas where it is dominant, that is semi-arid areas. You identify areas, then characteristics of semi-arid areas. Then after that, you look at the processes of physical weathering that we've done in the first question. Then after the processes, the factors, but this time it is to what extent? It has small extent or large extent. What extent? That's nature of parent rock. So it means you are going to tell us whether it is large extent or small extent, and then you show how nature of the parent rock accounts for the dominance of physical weathering. It means you first begin with this factor. Nature of the parent rock, homogeneous rocks, heterogeneous rocks, related rocks, soft rocks, as I explained in the first question. Then after exhausting nature of parent rock, we say, however, other factors account for the dominance of physical weathering in same areas apart from nature of the parent rock. Then you bring in other factors, hot temperatures, man, living organisms, plants, time. Then you make an evaluation. That is this question. When we get time, we shall come and look at account for the dominance of chemical weathering in the tropical area of East Africa. It means even here, this time it has changed. Yes? Someone asking? No? It is almost time, and I am summarizing I'm just giving you these two guiding questions. Maybe you can go and discuss amongst yourselves. Given the first one, when you approach, then the second one, I'm trying to tell you, to guide you how you look at it. Then account for the dominance of chemical weathering in the tropical area of East Africa. I'm saying, if you get time, we shall come and again look at this one. We shall use the other knowledge of the first one to interpret this one. Okay. If this one is said the dominance of physical weathering, and we started with definition of physical weathering, here we shall begin with definition of chemical weathering. Okay. Then here, after that, we identify semi-arid areas. Here we shall identify tropical humid areas. Here we look at characteristics of semi-arid areas. Here we shall look at characteristics of tropical humid areas. Here we look at processes of physical weathering. Here we shall look at processes of chemical weathering. Here we look at factors for the dominance of physical weathering semi-arid. Here we shall look at factors for the dominance of chemical weathering in tropical humid areas. They are the same factors, but the explanation this time will change because we are dealing with chemical weathering. But if you get time, you shall come and look at it in details. So, on that note, therefore, in case you have any question, you are free to ask.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
My question is, like, there's this question we're attempting that states in a semi-arid area.
You are not clear. Yes. Yes. Repeat that.
Well, the question that we were discussing before, that states account for the dominance of physical weathering in semi-arid areas.
Yeah.
So what I was asking, so account for the dominance of physical weathering in the semi-arid areas. So my question about that is,
yes.
So my question about to state like we select. Sir, I was asking,
And
like,
you are on and off. You are not very clear, please. I don't know what's happening.
sir, I was asking.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. I was asking when you giving what, like the process physical weather, you have to explain them when you pick the, like
the processes of physical weather. Yeah, I'm not getting it properly, but if you attended right from the beginning, I was trying to give you how you give them the physical weathering processes briefly. 2-3 lines. For example, when you are writing log disintegration, say breakdown of log or breakdown of homogeneous logs into rectangular blocks as a result of heating and cooling that result into expansion and contraction. That is the natural. Then you write another short paragraph, granular disintegration, breakdown of heterogeneous rocks into small particles known as granules as a result of heating and cooling during day and night, respectively. Briefly, the reason why you are bringing these physical weathering processes because you are going to interpret them when you are explaining factors. So someone just needs to know that you understand. Do you know what log disintegration means? Do you know exfoliation? Do you know acidification linkage? Do you know salt crystallization? Yeah. That is
Brian, you can ask.
Yes. Hello?
Brian, your hand is up. Unmute yourself and ask.
Network. Brian.
Okay.
Brian.
Okay, Dale. Let us go to Dale.
We have lost Brian. Dale. Okay, Dale.
Teacher, my question is,
Yes.
do you need to draw the sketch map after giving the introduction?
Not necessarily. Sketch maps take a lot of time. You may leave it out. It's not. Yeah. Sketch maps are very crucial. The paper will take a lot of time. Okay. Any other? Network. Oh. The network is disturbing. And I lost some of it.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, now my question is,
Yes.
when they say to, like that question you've written, to what extent does the nature? Like
Yes.
in the introduction part, I mean, do you start by defining what physical weathering is, and then that's when you come to that statement to a larger extent and then to a smaller extent? Or I mean, I just want that introduction part.
Okay, if you attend, you see this one, to what extent does the nature of parent account for the dominance? So physical weathering is stuff in the same area. You first define physical weathering. You define that. Okay. After defining physical weathering, you say physical weathering is dominant in semi-arid areas, like mentioned in the semi-arid areas, like I did in the first question. Okay.
Okay.
Then after identifying those semi-arid areas, you say these areas are characterized by, to describe the characteristics of these semi-arid areas that we did in the first question. Okay. Then after that, you identify the physical weathering processes like we did in the first question. The physical weathering processes are identify them. Then after that, that's when you say either to a great extent or less extent, okay, the dominance of physical weathering, those processes is a result of nature of the parent rock. Then you explain nature of the parent rock. You're looking at jointing, exhaustive jointing, rocks, homogeneous rocks, heterogeneous rocks, soft rocks. Then after that, because it is to what extent, it means there is another. Okay? Then you say, however, the dominance of physical weathering is the result of other factors apart from the one you have mentioned, apart from the nature of the parent rock, there are other factors. Then you bring in other factors, the temperature, okay, the relief, living organisms, man, mining, quarrying, road construction, okay, plant roots, time. Then you take a stand. Okay, that's what I'm saying. Yes. So, dear runners, I think there have been no other questions, and I think the network is disturbing us a little bit. Can I take one more question, please?
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Chef, for that question, is the nature of the parent rock, is it to a larger extent or a smaller extent?
What do you think from the one from the discussion? If you gain right from the beginning, what do you think?
To a smaller extent.
Yeah.
It is to
a smaller extent.
Exactly, because you know, like we said, weathering, what does the topic mean? The two elements of weather, rainfall, temperature, break down at the computation. So weathering comes from the word weather. So it is climate, which is from great extent. It is climate which really determines the type of weather. Although other factors contribute, but climate is very important. So you are right. You can conclude with that. And so the nature of current law determines the nature of weathering. There are other factors. Though this one contributes, but it's not the dominant. There are other factors. Okay? So it's good that also realize to have judged it that it's not from the text. Okay?
Okay.
So thank you very much for being a good audience. We shall meet next time when we get some time. And this time I think the network will be clear. So come and discuss more questions. Rocks, weathering, coastal geomorphology, lakes, glaciation, then other sections. We have section C, soils, vegetation, and climatology. So we get time, we shall be coming up. We shall be sharing this information. Thank you very much. We meet next time.
Thank you, sir.